Have you ever noticed that just when you begin making progress, you suddenly become very busy? You start checking emails, tidying the house, doing extra work, scrolling, eating, thinking about a relationship, helping everyone else. And somehow, the creative work, it just disappears. And you tell yourself, I got, I just got distracted. I've had too much to do. The timing wasn't right. But what if distraction was not accidental? What if distraction was not accidental? What if part of you was trying to protect you from what might happen if you kept going? Week 10 of The Artist's Way is about learning to recognize the habits, the distractions, the patterns that we use to interrupt our own creative momentum. Not because we do not want to create, but because creativity can make us feel exposed, uncertain, powerful, and sometimes frightened. Hi, I'm Leslie, and over the past year, I've been guiding deep dive sessions into the artist's way, helping people move through different stages of creative recovery. And week 10 is called Recovering a Sense of Self Protection. This is an important week because creativity does not only need encouragement, it needs protection. Protection from overwork, protection from distraction, protection from comparison, protection from the habits we reach for when growth begins to feel uncomfortable. This week explores four major themes: the ways we block ourselves, workaholism, creative drought, and the dangers of fame and competition. Let's begin with the ways we block ourselves. Julia Cameron suggests that every creative person has one or two favorite ways of interrupting creative energy. For one person, it may be food, for another, alcohol, for another, work, for another, a painful relationship, for another, social media or shopping or constant busyness. The activity itself is not always the problem. Food is not bad, work is not bad, relationships are not bad. The question is, how am I using this? Am I enjoying it or am I using it? Am I using that to avoid something? This is a very important distinction because blocking habits usually give us short term relief. Those blocking habits, they usually give us very short term relief. They reduce anxiety, they distract us, they make us feel more in control, but they also move us away from the creative risk that was beginning to appear. Imagine you have an idea, something fresh, something exciting, and with that excitement comes uncertainty. What if I am not capable of this? What if it changes my life? What if people judge it? What if it works? The anxiety begins to rise. And then you reach for your favorite block. You clean the kitchen, you start another work task, you check your phone, you think about someone who has disappointed you, or you eat something you are not hungry for. And for the moment, the anxiety disappears. It's gone out of the window. It just disappears. But so does the creative impulse. And this is why self protection, it begins with honesty, not judgment, honesty. What do I reach for when creativity begins to feel real? What habit do I defend more strongly? What would I become angry about having to reduce? Very often, the block we defend most fiercely is the one that has the strongest hold on us. And underneath the block is usually fear. Fear of where creativity might take us, fear of losing control, fear of changing, fear of becoming happier, fear of becoming happier. That last one, it may sound strange, But for some people, unhappiness is familiar. Being blocked is familiar. Knowing exactly who we are, even if we are frustrated, can feel safer than becoming someone new. So we interrupt the process. We take a creative U turn, as we spoke about in the previous chapter. We take a creative U turn and then we tell ourselves it was accidental. But once we begin to recognize the moment of choice, the block becomes less automatic. We can feel anxiety, but instead of escaping it, we can use it. We can write with it, paint with it, move with it. Let it become energy. Let it become energy. So here's the first reflection for this week. What do I reach for when creativity begins to feel uncomfortable? Which habit do I defend most strongly? What feeling might I be trying to avoid? The second major theme of this chapter is workaholism. And this is one of the most socially approved creative blocks. Socially approved creative blocks. If someone says, I am drinking too much, people may become concerned. If someone says, I am working too much, they may be admired. Working has an air of virtue around it. Working has an air of virtue around it. It sounds responsible, committed, productive. But being busy is not always the same as moving toward what matters. Being busy is not the same as moving forward. Sometimes work is how we avoid ourselves. We use work to avoid feelings, relationships, rest, play, and our real creative desires. Julia makes a powerful point. It is often easier to persuade someone to do more work than to persuade them to have fun. Many people will complete their morning pages, but resist the artist state. Why? Because work feels respectable, play feels dangerous. Play makes us curious, it can make us question our routine, it can remind us of what we actually want. And that is why fun can feel threatening. A workaholic may say, if I had more time, I would enjoy myself. But the real question is, how much time am I currently allowing for non productive enjoyment? Not networking, not exercise done as another achievement, not entertainment while answering emails, but actual play. Time that does not need to justify itself. Workaholism is not simply about the number of hours worked. It is also about the emotional quality of those hours. There's a treadmill feeling to it. You work, but never feel complete. You finish one task and immediately begin another. You feel guilty when you're resting. Your worth becomes connected to how much you produce. And creativity suffers. It suffers because creativity needs space, it needs silence, it needs wandering, it needs time that appears unproductive. So, one of the most practical tools in this chapter is to keep a time log. For several days, record where your time actually goes. Not where you think it goes, but where it really goes. How many hours are spent working? How much time is lost to interruptions? How much is spent scrolling, worrying, or doing things that were not really necessary? How much time is given to creative work? How much time is given to rest, to play? This is not an exercise in shame. It is an exercise in clarity. Because many people do not need more time. They need clearer boundaries around the time they already have. And that may mean no work after a certain hour, no answering messages during creative time, No canceling the class because another task appeared. No carrying work into every evening, every weekend. A boundary is not punishment, it is protection. A boundary says, this part of my life matters too. This part of my life matters too. So here's the second reflection. Am I using work to avoid myself? How much time do I genuinely allow for play? And what boundary would protect my creative life? The third major theme is creative drought. Creative drought. Every creative life has dry periods, times when those ideas do not come. The work feels flat, the pages feel empty. You feel disconnected from the part of yourself that once felt alive. And during those periods, it is very tempting to conclude it is gone. I have nothing left to say. I was never creative. This will last forever. But drought, creative drought, is not proof that creativity has ended. It's just part of that creative cycle. Julia describes these periods as a kind of desert. There may be no visible signs of progress, no inspiration, no emotional reward, and yet the task is to continue. Not dramatically, quietly, one page, one walk, one small act of showing up, one small act of showing up. And this is where the morning pages, the primary tool of this book, the morning pages becomes especially important. Not because they will immediately produce something brilliant, but because they keep the path open. They become a trail back to yourself. During a drought, consistency, being consistent may feel pointless, but the value of consistency is not always visible in the moment. You may be processing grief, fatigue, disappointment, a transition between old work and new work. You may be between dreams, and the empty period, the drought, may be preparing space for something you cannot yet see. The difficulty is that we want proof. We want to know when the drought will end. We want to know what's going to come next. But creativity rarely gives us that assurance. It asks us to continue before we know. This is why drought requires faith, not blind optimism, faith in process, faith that showing up still matters, faith that the absence of visible movement does not mean nothing is happening. The creative life is not a constant high. It includes waiting, it includes uncertainty, and it definitely includes silence. And it also includes periods where the work just seems to disappear. The task is not to force inspiration, the task is to remain available to it. So here's the third reflection. Where am I experiencing a creative drought? If you are currently experiencing a creative drought, where am I experiencing a creative drought? Have I mistaken dryness for failure? And what simple practice can keep the path open until something begins to move again? The fourth theme is fame and competition. Two very powerful distractions because they move our attention away from the work and toward other people. Fame asks, how do I look? And competition asks, how am I doing compared with them? And both these questions, it takes us out of the creative process. Fame is not the same as success. Success can be the feeling at the end of a day when you have done honest work. You wrote, you practiced, you created something that felt true. Fame is about recognition, approval, visibility, and how the work appears from the outside. And there's nothing wrong with wanting your work to be seen. There's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting an audience. The danger, the danger begins when recognition becomes the measure of whether the work has value. That's the danger. It's when recognition becomes the measure of whether the work has value. Then we stop asking, is the work alive? But we begin asking, will people notice? Will they like it? Will it make me important? And the same thing happens with competition. We see someone else succeeding, they're publishing, they're performing, they're growing an audience. And and instead of thinking, you know what, that proves that it can be done. What we think is that there's less room for me now. They are ahead. I have missed my chance. What do I have to offer? Comparison makes creativity feel like a race. And once creativity becomes a race, we begin abandoning our own pace. We rush ideas. We judge projects too quickly. We discard anything that does not look immediately successful. And we focus on what appears marketable rather than what is genuinely trying to emerge. Julia warns us not to judge new work too quickly. A new idea may be awkward, incomplete, unfashionable. It may not make sense yet. That does not mean it lacks value. Creative work, it needs time to develop. It needs room to be clumsy, to change shape, to surprise us. If we demand that every idea prove itself immediately, we may destroy the very work that could have become our strongest. The ego wants an instant win. Creativity wants time. This is why showing up for the work, that's the real victory. Not being first, not being the most visible, not being better than someone else. Showing up, staying true to our own interests, following the thread that belongs to you. Originality, it does not mean creating something that's untouched by influence. It means allowing your own experience, your own curiosity, your own perspective to shape the work. You are the origin of your art. Your task is not to defeat everyone else, it is to remain connected to what is trying to come through you. So here's the fourth reflection. Am I creating or am I trying to appear successful? Whose progress is distracting me from my own? And what would I work on if no one else's timeline mattered? Week 10 is ultimately about protecting your creative energy. Not from creativity, but from the habits that pull you away from it. The overwork, the distraction, the comparison, the need for approval. The urge to shut down when anxiety appears. Self protection. Self protection is not isolation, it is learning to recognize what supports your creativity and what quietly undermines it. It is learning to say no, to set boundaries, to rest, to play, to keep showing up during those dry periods, and to stop measuring your creative life against someone else's, against everyone else's. So, if there's one thing that you take from week 10, let it be this. The moment you feel the urge to block, pause and ask yourself, what am I feeling? What am I avoiding? And what would it look like to protect the work instead? Thank you for joining me for week 10 of The Artist's Way. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know what is the habit or distraction you often use to interrupt your creativity. And what boundary could help you protect your creative energy this week? In the next video, we move into week 11, recovering a sense of autonomy. I'll see you there.